With anti-Semitism rising in America and pressure growing on President Biden over the war in Gaza, one of Israel's staunchest voices against extremism on both sides has been Democratic Congressman Ritchie Torres, who joins us now on the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd just like to start by hearing your take on the recent arrests on college campuses. It seems to be very clear that these protests aren't really about supporting Palestinians, rather about calling for violence against Israelis. Is there a better way? And what does being pro-Palestinian actually look like?
There's a crisis of anti-Semitism in America, and higher education is ground zero. I worry that we have college campuses that are indoctrinating the next generation of Americans with a hatred for Israel that's so visceral and fanatical that it renders them indifferent to the value of Jewish life. And as you said, there's nothing remotely pro-peace or anti-war or pro-Palestinian about the encampment movement. There's a deepening rot of anti-Semitism in the encampment movement. Two organizations, social justice, Palestinians, social justice in Palestine, and within our lifetime, these two organizations openly celebrate October 7th, openly glorify the terrorism of Hamas as quote-unquote resistance. And so if you are openly glorifying Hamas and terrorism, you're not pro-peace and anti-war, you're anti-peace and pro-war. And that is exactly what's happening. And you might have seen in Columbia University, there was a student organizer who said that Zionists do not deserve to live. And he said that Zionists should be grateful to him for not going out there and murdering. So these are the kinds of people who are leading the encampment movement in places like Columbia University, and it's deeply troubling. And of course, the Islamic leader of Iran has enthusiastically endorsed the anti-Israel encampment movement, which tells you everything you need to know.
Absolutely. Now, since October 7th, President Biden has remained steadfast in support for Israel, as have many Democrats like yourself. But despite that, both you and President Biden have faced some harassment over this. Why is it important to you and to many Democrats to take this stand in support of Israel and against these anti-peace movements that have sort of taken over the Palestinian cause?
Look, I feel like we all have an obligation to fight hate and extremism, no matter what form it takes, no matter what direction from which it comes. People are often shocked that a Black, gay, Latino, millennial congressman from the Bronx cares deeply about fighting anti-Semitism. But I reject the notion that one must be Jewish to combat anti-Semitism, just like I would reject the notion that one must be Black to combat anti-Black racism. Throughout history, there have been Jews who gave their lives for the cause of civil rights. 60 years ago, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, as well as James Chaney, were barbarically murdered in the Mississippi burning so that Black Americans could have the right to vote and live freely, liberated from the cruelty of Jim Crow. And so, for me, we're all in this together. We all have an obligation to fight hate. And I worry that the far left could be to the Democratic Party in American politics what Jeremy Corbyn became to the Labour Party in British politics. And the burden falls on pro-Israel Democrats like myself to resist, actively resist, the Jeremy Corbynization of progressive politics.
Now, you've been targeted personally for your support for Israel, even receiving comments, some of which you shared, in which anti-Israel activists have used the N-word and made other appallingly racist and hateful comments. What is your response to this sort of extremism that we're seeing?
Look, there's no issue on which I have had to face more hate, harassment, and death threats than on the subject of Israel. I've even been the target of racist invective from Mohammed Hadid, who is the father of Bella and Gigi Hadid. His comments are so offensive that it's almost not even worth repeating them. But he made blatantly racist comments about me simply because I'm pro-Israel. And it seems like if you're a person of color and pro-Israel, then you become fair game for racism. So there's a double standard within American society.
Now, switching gears just a little bit, I mean, a lot of the activities, the actions, the chaos we're seeing in the Middle East is fueled and funded by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which you referenced earlier. What is U.S. Congress doing to push back against what is, dubbed the head of the snake?
There's a false narrative among the far lefts that Israel is the root of all evil in the Middle East. And my response is there is a root of all evil, but it's not Israel. It's Iran. Israel is a stabilizing force in the Middle East, whereas Iran is the destabilizing force. Like Iran is intent on destabilizing the state system in the Middle East in order to achieve its own ambitions for regional hegemony. Wherever you have a failed state, whether it's Lebanon or Syria or Yemen or to a lesser extent Iraq, you have the tentacles of Iran. And Iran has been waging war on Israel, on the world's only Jewish state, through a network of proxies. And after October 7th, we all should have had an awakening about the true nature of the Iranian threat. There is no reforming the present regime in Iran. It is rotten to the core, and it is the root of instability in the Middle East. And we in the United States have to fundamentally rethink our approach to Iran.
Now, when it comes to social media, we've really seen some shocking anti-Semitism, support for terrorism on social media. You have been one of the supporters of the bill proposed in U.S. Congress, passed in U.S. Congress, to require TikTok or ByteDance to sell to a non-adversarial country. Well, in simple terms, of course, to not be controlled by the government of China. What is the role of social media in the conflict we're seeing today between Israel and Hamas? And how much impact does this disinformation, especially state-sponsored disinformation, impact public opinion?
Well, there's nothing unprecedented about anti-Semitism. What's unprecedented is the algorithmic amplification of anti-Semitism on social media. Social media platforms like TikTok and Twitter enable anti-Semitism to spread at a pace and on a scale and to an extent that we have never seen before. And nowhere has anti-Semitism been more amplified than on TikTok. We in the United States have real concerns about the national security risk of TikTok. We passed legislation that is not a ban on TikTok, it's a forced sale of TikTok. And the purpose of the legislation is not to target speech, as is commonly misunderstood. The purpose is to target hostile foreign ownership. ByteDance, TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is subject to the control of the Chinese Communist Party. ByteDance collects vast quantities of information about 170 million American users and is required by Chinese law to report that information to the Chinese government upon request. And for us, TikTok is not merely a social media platform, it's the leading news source for the next generation of Americans. And the fact that we have put our leading news source, the most impressionable American minds, in the hands of our leading foreign adversary is an act of national self-sabotage.
Absolutely. Well, Congressman Torres, we are out of time, but I want to thank you so much for your principled leadership and, of course, for taking the time to speak with us today.
Absolutely. Take care.